Well, today you guys are in for a treat. We're going to read Dangerous Crossings on page 327. It said, so this is kind of just like a preview of the story. It says, in February of 1778, at the height of the Revolutionary War, which we'll talk about in a second on what the Revolutionary War is or was. Um, so when all this was going on, the American representative from Massachusetts, whose name was John Adams, is sent on a secret mission to France. It's dangerous. It's super dangerous to cross the Atlantic anytime, but especially in the winter. But the situation is desperate, and the colonies absolutely need France's help against the British Army. Now, Adams is accompanied by his 10-year-old son named Johnny, and together, the father and the son have to weather an very angry ocean, perilous sea battles, and other dangers to help the colonies achieve freedom. Now, there's vivid illustrations and fast-paced narrative bring to life the little told story of character-defining event in the lives of two future presidents. So let's just talk about the war really quickly. So as you guys know, now that you've already worked on this in your history class with Mrs. Robinson, what happened is many people that now live in the colonies lived over here, right? And this king over here is a ruler, and he still technically rules these colonies over here. But now generations and generations have grown up over here. They've never even traveled over here before, and so many people are hating the fact that this king owns them, right? So then a couple of colonists came up with this idea of let's fight for our freedom. And the idea of them fighting for their freedom was ridiculous because over here, this is the most powerful army in the world back in this day. And the idea that these colonies that don't even really have their own government could somehow get together an army that can kind of compete with the most powerful army in the world is crazy to think of. So they thought of it. They got all the colonists, most of the colonists, to join in on the idea, and now they are fighting this crazy war. And the war is not looking so good for the colonists. So in the story, there are a few head colonists that decided they have to travel across this vast ocean and go up, and they need to go to France, and they need to get the help of France. And they couldn't like text each other, tweet each other, Facebook each other back in these days. They couldn't call each other. This was the main way of communication besides writing a letter. And that's what they're going to do. But on the way, you're going to see in the story on the way, there's things that are going to happen, such as there's going to be battles in the middle of the ocean. And it's pretty intense and pretty interesting. But I really wanted to make sure that I Google Earth this so you guys can actually see. I mean, think about how big the Great Lakes are. Think of how big the Great Lakes are. If you've ever seen Lake Michigan before, it is ginormous. Okay. Think of how many of those Great Lakes you'd have to fit together to go from here all the way over to here. It is such a long voyage, taking months in a ship where you're staring at blue skies in the blue sea, and that's pretty much it. So you really got to put your mindset into what is happening, and don't think, oh, it's history. It's just some black and white picture in a book, because it's much more than that. And when you see it as much more than that, it's a lot easier to dive in, understand, appreciate, and enjoy the story. All right, here we go. Dangerous Crossings. Young Johnny Adams could hardly believe his good fortune. On a cold February day in 1778, he stood at the ocean's edge, a few miles from home. The wind blew fiercely around him, and the blustering snow stung his cheeks like needles. But Johnny didn't mind. 10 years old, He had never been further than a day's ride from home, yet here he was, about to sail to France with his father. What did Singing Cheeks matter compared to that? He could still hear the words that an elderly cousin had declared in warning. Mr. Adams, you are going to embark under very threatening signs. The heavens frown, the clouds roll, the howling winds howl, the waves of the sea roar upon the beach. Johnny could not have been more pleased. Soon the barge arrived to fetch them to the ship waiting offshore. Although they were leaving Massachusetts in a hurry and in secret, they were not going unprepared. Their baggage included 2 fat sheep, 2 hogs, a barrel of apples, 5 bushels of corn, chocolate, sugar, eggs, paper, quills, ink, double mattress, comforter, and pillow. There was room for it all, and soon father and son were settled in some dry hay, bobbing up and down like corks in a bottle. It was dangerous to cross the ocean in midwinter, but time was pressing. The war with England was almost 3 years old, and it was not going well. The rebel army had barely limped into their winter quarters. Now they're called rebel army because at this time the colonies answered to the king. So the fact that they were trying to be their own colonies, they were rebelling against their king, so they're called the rebel army. Many colonial many colonial soldiers lacked muskets and powder, so guns and ammunition. They were also short of clothes, blankets, and shoes. The new Americans desperately needed the support of other countries, especially France, England's greatest rival. Other representatives were in Paris already, but their progress was uncertain. It was hoped that the calm and thoughtful John Adams could do more. Samuel Captain Samuel Tucker welcomed Johnny and his father aboard before dusk. Now, Captain Tucker's new 24-gun frigate, the Boston, had a deck more than 100 feet long. 3 towering masts stood guard overhead, clothed in endless furls of sail. Down below, the view was less grand. The passageways were cramped, and everywhere was a terrible smell of sea and sailors mingled together. Johnny and his father found their tiny cabin clean, at least, and their blankets and pillows, or with their blankets and pillows, and it did feel a little bit like home. Now, once the Boston put out to sea, Johnny noticed a change. Waves looked bigger. They felt bigger too. A strange feeling swept over him. His head was spinning and his stomach as well. He soon took to his bed, glad that his groans were lost amid the creaking masts and the howling wind. Though John Adams also felt ill, he distracted himself by writing in his diary. Seasickness, he wrote, seems to be the effect of agitation. The smoke of sea coal, the smell of stagnant, putrid water, and the odor of the ship where the sailors slept, or other, or any other offensive odor, would not trigger it alone. No doubt this was good to know, but it did not make Johnny feel any better. The next day, a calmer sea improved everybody's mood. Johnny and his father returned to the deck, glad for a breath of fresh air. A ship on the weather quarter, shouted the lookout. Uh-oh, a ship. So, is it an enemy ship? Chances are that it is an enemy ship. So he looks out and he doesn't see one enemy ship. He sees 3. Captain Tucker turned his glass upon the distant speck. Actually, there were 3 ships. The British ships, by the looks of them. He was not pleased with the 3-to-1 odds. His officers protested. They argued. We will not run from an enemy before we see him, they said. We will not fly from danger before we know we are in it. Besides, they were thinking, what if these were merchant ships loaded with valuable goods? Bowing to their enthusiasm, the captain ordered the Boston closer. It was soon clear, though, that his fears were well founded. These were frigates indeed, and from their viewpoint, the odds were just right. All three now gave chase. Two quickly fell behind, but the third kept pace. For 2 more days, these two ships followed them. So there's two because two fell behind, but the third kept pace. Oh, I'm sorry. So out of the three, the one was right next to it. The other two are a little slower. But everyone's trying to get there as fast as possible, and it took days, probably a lot of anxiety. Fell behind, but the third kept pace. For 2 more days, it followed. The sailors on watch said the frigate were closing the gap, but Johnny could not tell. His eyes were not as sharp as theirs. Closing the gap means the ship is getting closer and closer. Eventually, they're going to have to battle them. Our powder and balls were placed by the guns, his father noted in his diary, and everything ready to begin the action. So whenever I'm reading the story, I always talk to the students, and we really discuss the emotions that must be going on in everyone's mind, but especially Johnny's. He's 10 years old, and he knows that they're about to get into a deadly battle. They're going to fight with all their weapons, and they're not going to be nice about it. They are stranded in the middle of the ocean, and whoever the winner is will be the winner, and whoever the loser is, the worst will happen to. There's got to be so much emotion. And just because this happened a long time ago doesn't mean these human beings don't feel the same exact emotions that we feel today. Almost 3 years earlier, Johnny and his mother stood on high ground watching the Battle of Bunker Hill 8 miles away. But that had been almost make believe, a little more than just flashes of light and distant cries because they were so far away. Here, he would be right in the thick of things. Cannons would fire and swords would flash. One of the ships would be boarded. The two crews would grapple with knives and pistols. Anything else that came to their hand. An officer interrupted Johnny's thoughts. He and his father should take shelter below. As if the frigate wasn't trouble enough, there was also a terrible storm coming. They went straight to their cabin, and soon the ship began to pitch, rocking violently back and forth. They could not sit or stand without being knocked about. It was with the utmost difficulty, John Adams remembered, that my little son and I could hold ourselves in bed with both of our hands embracing ourselves against the boards and the planks, the timbers in our feet. Suddenly there was a flash of lightning. Crack! The ship shuddered from the blow. Johnny and his father shared a worried glance. Was that cannon fire? Had the British taken them over? Would the firing continue until they surrendered? Or would the Boston fight until it sank beneath the waves? In truth, there were no cannons at work. The ship had been struck by lightning, an officer told them. The main mast must have shattered, and the 4 crew members, well, they were hurt. For 3 more days and nights, the storm continued. Chests and casks were tossed about like straw, and no one could stay dry or walk steadily on the deck, the wind blowing against the current, producing a tumbling sea. Adam observes. Vast mountains of water breaking on the ship threatened to bury us all at once in the deep. Through it all, Johnny was proud that his father stayed calm. He was a practical man, and there was nothing to gain by making a fuss. Finally, the skies cleared. But the pale sunlight fell on a broken ship. Sails were ripped, masts splintered, and even worse, Boston had been damaged, blown hundreds of miles off course. I'm sorry, it wasn't damaged. Even worse, the Boston had been blown hundreds of miles off of course. And as the captain surveyed the damage, he only had a tiny bit of good news. The British frigate was gone. As the sailors began making repairs, Johnny took some French lessons from the ship's doctors and learned the names of the sails. I am most satisfied with myself, Johnny had once told his father. when I have applied part of my time to something useful. Part of my time to some useful employment. One day a sailor pulled up a Portuguese man of war in a bucket. Johnny looked on in wonder. Was this truly a fish from the sea? Careful, the sailor warned him. One touch of his twisted cords would sting like 100 bees. Johnny's father and the captain often spoke together their mission and the conduct of the ship. Even from a distance, Johnny recognized his father's impatience. He spoke of a ship at sea as kind of prison. He was especially tired of the view. We see nothing but sky, clouds, and sea, he noted, and then sea, clouds, sky. After 4 weeks at sea, the Boston spotted another ship, a British merchantman loaded with precious goods. This was a prize worth catching. The passengers were ordered below as the Boston let out its sails. But while Johnny and the rest stayed put, John Adams returned to the deck, and he heard a loud boom, and then a cannonball shot over his head. The other ship had fired on them. Captain Tucker ordered the Boston brought about so that the merchantman could see the strength of her guns. Would the enemy, Captain Adams wondered, choose to sink, or would they surrender? Meaning, oh, he has no idea what he just shot towards. I'm going to show him what our battleship looks like, and he'll realize two things are going to happen. He's either going to get sunk, and we're going to take him down, or he's going to say, I surrender, take my ship. So the surrender did come quickly. The crew of the merchantman were taken prisoner, and their ship remanned with some of the Boston sailors. But even in victory, Captain Tucker was angry at Johnny's father for risking his life by returning to deck. Meaning the entire reason they're going there is to get Johnny's father, John Adams, to go over and talk to the French and talk them into helping them win the war. So he's upset. You're too valuable. Go down and be safe. My dear sir, how came you here? He asked. Had Adams forgotten his mission? Wasn't his safe arrival in France of the greatest importance to the entire revolution? John Adams stood his ground. I ought to do my fair share of fighting, he explained simply. Johnny was not surprised. Until now, his father had been defending his country with ideas and words, but he would not shrink from any conflict if the cause was worthy or just. On March 24th, the Boston saw the coast of Europe at last, and soon they reached their port in France. The pleasure resulting from the sight of land cattle houses after such a long and dangerous voyage was so very great, John Adams observed. He and Johnny had survived storms, seasickness, boredom, battles. They had seen firsthand that war was not all glory and games. They had seen men die and tested their own courage as well. But the real adventure still lay ahead. Americans would need much help to achieve their freedom, and Johnny and his father were glad to be a part of it. All right, so that was non-fiction. They used a, let's see, is that nonfiction or realistic nonfiction? I mean, let's see, it's historical fiction. It's historical fiction. It's a fictional story set in the past, and it contains characters, places, and events that actually really happened or existed, or could have happened or exist. So that's a great, great story. I really look forward to reading that one because it kind of brings to life, um, the Revolutionary War. So there's a lot of causes and effects there, right? The cause is needing French's help, and the effect would be having to travel this dangerous long journey, or the cause was this terrible storm that happened in the middle of the ocean. The effect was all of the damage that happened to the ship. So there were visual elements. They did a really good job of depicting images through the words that they wrote down, that really brought the story to life. And they used the primary source of the diary. All right, now I'd like for you to answer the comprehension questions to show me that you read and understand the story, and you're all set. Well done.